Namaste, everyone. Welcome to the Cārvāka podcast. This is Kushalmehra. So, today's podcast is about a very specific case. I'll give you guys a brief background. I think a few years ago, or two, three, four. I'm not giving you the exact number because when it was exactly filed, I think it was in 2021. There was an alleged caste discrimination charge against the BAPS temple in the United States of America that had been alleged from one side, and there is an ongoing investigation. And recently, during the ongoing investigation, certain remarks were submitted in a court in India, is from what I have understood. And the remarks were filed on July 13th in the Rajasthan High Court by some of the artisans, and those artisans have stated in the letter submitted to the court, and I'm reading a bit of it, is pressurized to join as plaintiffs in a civil complaint in New Jersey court. So I just found out about this. I thought this is a new development in the case. So usually, I'm either talking to Suhag from HAF or I'm talking to Nikunj from Kona. I was like, what the hell? I'll get both of them together in the same podcast and we'll talk about it together. So, Suhag and Nikunj, welcome.
Thanks, Kushal.
Thanks for having us.
All right. So, maybe we can start like this. Nikunj, you can explain the background of the case, and Suhag, then we can talk about the court proceedings with you. So, Nikunj, Pele, what is the case? I did not want to give the details, so I just paraphrased it. So, first explain the case, and then we'll go to the proceedings bit with Suhag.
Yeah. So in May of 2021, most of us woke up to this, crazy sort of like allegations against the BAPS temple. For the folks who don't know BAPS is the one of the Swaminarayan sects within the Hindu tradition, very famous for the largest temples that you may have seen across the world. So in the case of New Jersey in May of 2021, several federal agents, I would say a couple of hundred federal agents and their, sort of like law enforcement, let's say, descended upon the temple in New Jersey, just barged in and started to search for, basically take workers, question them, and escorted some of these workers out of the temple compound, started to go into various sacred sort of facilities. So there was a lot of things that went on in May of 2021. And that's when the New York Times broke the news that the BAPS temple organization has been accused of alleged caste discrimination for exploiting the so-called Dalit workers, for $1.20 an hour. They're working 87 hours a week. So there are a whole bunch of different allegations, labor law violations, but the big one, as far as this whole thing is concerned, is that the temple basically was, caste discrimination, essentially. So from that point onwards, you saw a whole barrage of media attacks / coverage. You had your typical, academics and sort of South Asian scholars just raining down on this whole thing as if it was a fact versus fiction, or even without even the all the details coming out. It was just essentially like, they were basically guilty until proven innocent in that sense. So that's where this whole thing started. And, 2 years later, pretty much in 2023, we recently saw what you just mentioned by certain workers from the Patharghadai Sangh, the Mazdoor Sangh, etc., writing a letter to submitting basically the testimony in a press release form to the Rajasthan High Court, where they actually talk about that they were pressurized and coerced into this by advocate Swati Sawant and some of the activists. So that's some pretty big, I would say, damaging information that just recently came out. And it's a sort of a breaking news, I would say, as far as the development is concerned, because a lot of things have been fairly silent in the case for various reasons. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that. But that's kind of the background, I would say, of where we stand today. So we kind of talked about, we broke this also as part of the kind of, very hot off the topic news just a few weeks ago, I guess, on Twitter and some of the social media channels when we received the letter. So that's where we are. I'll stop here.
Okay, Suhag, over to you. So what does it mean in terms of from a court proceedings perspective, like what exactly is this in terms of the lawsuit itself,
Yeah.
or the case itself?
So I'll just add a little bit more to what Nikunj said. First, there's two parallel things happening here. You have the federal raid, which Nikunj referred to, that occurs, and so that was for criminal investigation purposes, right? So you have not just caste discrimination, but potentially human trafficking charges, labor law charges, immigration fraud charges. So there's a number of things that the federal government was convinced they would find. We still don't know that they've found anything, because 2.5 years after this unprecedented raid of hundreds of federal agencies, the federal government is known as kind of alphabet soup. They have a gazillion acronyms, and so probably every acronym was on the ground there at BAPS. So you have all of these people charging into the temple at the crack of dawn. And so we, all those resources, taxpayer dollars, it seems to be a little bit of a nothing burger right now, because they're 2.5 years in. You would imagine that at a raid of that size, that they had some smoking guns, that it was just a matter of finding, the actual evidence to be able to connect the dots and run with it, especially because the New York Times story hit on the same day as the raid. So as far as I am concerned, if I have a case, I'm going to be sure that I have all my, I's dotted and T's crossed if I'm going to get the media involved, even before there's any sort of charges. So that's the criminal piece of it. And then there's the civil case. And so the civil case is where I think that the affidavit coming from India from the workers could have an impact. We don't know just quite yet how those dots are going to get connected. But Swati Sawant, she filed a civil case against BAPS, saying that she's representing these workers. The New York Times and other stories stated that there were something like 200 workers. That number kind of varies based on depending on the reportage. We're told that that they were all low caste. How they know that, whether each one was interviewed, none of that is clear. But we're supposed to just take that as true based on the reportage. The civil case has 6 named plaintiffs, and then it says kind of an et al., which means that there might be others. But we know that the case has 5 to 6 named plaintiffs. The affidavit says that it's representing 12. So the math is a little bit wonky, even though I'm not the best at math. That's why I went to law school. But the fact is that you have 5 to 6 people named in a case and 12 workers saying we were coerced by this attorney. And so what sort of impact that will have, I think that either the attorneys for BAPS will have to maybe do some homework to see, what this affidavit means, where it's coming from, et cetera, and submit it to the court. But right now, that case, even the civil case, is on hold pending charges from the federal government. 2.5 years in, there are no charges from the federal government.
So, Nikunj, isn't this the normal scenario when the federal government is not even prepared to file charges? That means it's some sort of a nothing burger and they really don't have anything. I mean, I'm just assuming. Wouldn't that be the assumption?
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're looking at, right? I mean, when you look at some of these high profile cases of like raids happening and things like that, they actually have a lot of evidence. Then they go in, right? This is kind of like they went in guns blazing looking for something, and they're like, all of a sudden they're like, oh, where is it? Where is it? That kind of a thing. So I think there's an element of embarrassment, I think, on the federal government level, which I feel it's going to come out at some point, because they went in all, like you said, like Suhagji said, all the alphabet soups, basically went in. The FBI and so on, you can put all the names in there. They went in thinking there's going to be a lot of stuff, because they were given a bag of crap essentially and said, here, this is what you're going to find. So this is a very good example. And, we have seen this happening in the Cisco case and so many things. It's a very good example of people not understanding the dynamics, the cultural dynamics, the issues related to caste, all of these things as far as our community is concerned, right? So when they're given a load of crap by someone saying, hey, this is how it's going to be. I mean, if you look at the case, right, there's like, what's interesting is they actually just say, oh, these workers are from the lowest caste of India, also known as Dalit. I mean, when you get into the technicalities and semantics, there is no Dalit caste per se, right? So
they actually said that. They actually
yeah,
said
it's in the case. It's in the case. The same thing happened in the Cisco case. So we know someone is feeding them this load of crap, and they're taking this fully verbatim and going at it. I mean, the level of due diligence here is just appalling to me that somebody can actually do this, go in. And also, if you look at the history of the United States, just to kind of finish my thought on this, there haven't really been cases of this type of a magnitude where you're going into a sacred compound and just raiding it, just going into quarters. You're talking about religious, spiritual leaders or spiritual, I would say, pundits, things like that, swamis, going into there. They don't even entertain visitors, or they don't even entertain the women. They obviously stay away from women. They have a very strict code of conduct. You have women FBI officers going in, interrogating them, putting a gun to their head, things like that. This is totally unbelievable. And the amount of outrage is unfortunately lacking in the community. And that was just very shocking to me. I was personally pissed off. I'm not even Swaminarayan, but I was personally pissed off at this thing. Said, how dare they go into our sacred space, any sacred space, and blatant violation of our civil rights, blatant violation of our religious rights, and just completely inappropriate behavior. But this is what we have here. And no coverage. There hasn't been any coverage talking about this type of thing. All it has been is, the Daily Trentonian calling it the Temple of Doom, right? You have Suraj Yengde saying Hindu temples are monuments of slavery. You got that kind of stuff going on, but nobody talking about the blatant violations of the religious rights and the civil rights of Hindus.
Wait, so Temple of Doom, wasn't that like a movie or something?
Yeah. Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom. I mean, Temple of Doom is the classic case of Hinduphobia, right? You have this high priest eating monkey brains and worshiping Kali. And I remember being, just teased about it incessantly when I was in grade school or middle school when the movie came out, because it took every worst stereotype that there is about India, about Hindu culture and everything, and just concentrated into a handful of scenes. But speaking about Temple of Doom and stereotypes, the problem with whether it's Cisco or whether it's BAPS is that when the government proceeds on the basis of inaccurate and false stereotypes about an entire ethnic minority, and then it's bolstered by a media that already perpetuates those stereotypes, it becomes just a vicious cycle. And that's what you see with BAPS. When you read the coverage, of course, there was the Temple of Doom. There was one in which it said that, the workers were forced to eat lentils and potatoes. I'm thinking, that's kind of my weekly diet. I mean, so, and I think I'm pretty healthy. So
every Indian eats aloo and dal. What the hell? This is actually the media coverage.
It was a nutritionally lacking diet or something like that, right?
Yeah. It's like most Gujaratis are having that. In that case, is nutritionally lacking diet.
Exactly. So that was part of the news coverage. You see echoes of that also in the complaint with Cisco. We don't know what any sort of governmental complaint would look like because it hasn't been filed yet. But even in the civil case, you see kind of fundamental misunderstandings or intentional ignorance and malintent with regards to the law. The way that religious workers come to the United States is under an R1 visa program. And the R1 visa program is basically for religious vocations. This is not just something that the Hindu community uses. We, in fact, depend on it because all of our institutions for religious vocational training, whether it's pujaris, whether it's people who become sannyasis, or shilpis, temple architects, and all of that sort of training occurs in India. And so we don't have those types of institutions in the United States. So we as a community depend on the R1 visa program. So do the Catholics. The Catholics apparently have a shortage of priests. And so they need priests coming from, African countries. They have coming from South American countries to kind of staff the variety of Catholic churches across the country. So the R1 visa it runs a gamut. It can be a architectural, worker. It can also be a missionary. So in terms of the types of pay requirements, it's different from, say, a H-1B worker visa or any other sort of worker visa. So this idea that these workers came here and were underpaid, we don't know the facts of how much they were really paid or not. There are some requirements for certain workers, but the way that the civil complaint is framed, to me, I practiced immigration law for 7 years before, or actually right about the time we started HAF 20 years ago. But that shows me that this person actually doesn't know how the R1 visa works. There's many different vocations within the R1 visa where room and board and some stipend is adequate. So this idea that, they were only paid $1 or whatever, all that, those are facts that still remain to be seen. If the case ever goes public or the government ever files charges, or if the civil case proceeds, that we'll find out really what were the terms for these workers. But I also want to say one more thing about the workers. From what I understand, these are workers that had come numerous times to different temples. Now, if the conditions were really that bad, if BAPS was abusing them, why would this happen only in Robbinsville and not the other temples that they had come to? So they basically are coming back over and over again anytime an opportunity comes to work for BAPS. So there's a number of things that I think once hopefully some of this stuff becomes a little bit more public, that that everyone will know, not just to Nikunj's point, the community apathy, that maybe people in the community will say, whoa, is this what happened? Which temple could be next? We need to be worried about that. But also in terms of the media, we know that whether it's the Cisco case and the actual facts that are publicly available that go against the story that has predominantly been told, there's very little interest in even actually telling a truthful story.
I just want to add, Nikunj, my 2 cents over here before I come to you. I think a lot of your problems are created by Indians in India, and I'll explain how. This whole vegetarian attack on Hindus for being vegetarian, it's just a coincidence that we are talking on this day. It is the 26th of July right now, and Sudha Murthy just made an innocuous statement. She just made an innocuous statement. I'm a vegetarian. I carry my food and utensils everywhere. This is so normal. Like, my wife is a Arya Samaji. Arya Samaj rejects the notion of Jati Varna at its core. It rejects it. Arya Samaj is one of the most successful reform movements of India when it comes to caste reforms or women's rights reforms. Arya Samaj was at the forefront. Everybody, irrespective of their caste, is allowed in Arya Samaj or their
Yeah.
Jati affiliation. Now, my wife, when we got married, she was very categorical in telling me, I will never touch chicken. My wife is not born in India. My wife is born and raised in Canada. She has no caste consciousness. To say this is Brahmanism, could there be some elements of that? I'm never going to say it is zero. But I can point out members of the scheduled caste, scheduled tribe community in India, living, breathing communities in India, since the Bhakti movement or before the Bhakti movement too, that are vegetarian by choice. So what have they imbibed is my question. That is point number one. This because we can laugh at, and even I laugh at them saying, "Arey dal aloo khata hai tu? How dare you?" I mean, at the face of it, it's ridiculous. Now, I'm a non-vegetarian. My mother's a vegetarian. My wife's a vegetarian. My father, he barely eats chicken. But I'm a non-vegetarian. But it's not an issue. In our house, chicken is usually not cooked. If cooked, the utensils are not different sometimes. They are different sometimes. And this is a very normal thing. But if you're a vegan in the West,
Brownie points.
yeah, and so I guess veganism is not white man Brahminism, but vegetarianism is Hindu man Brahminism, and all these shenanigans are basically theories that Indian social scientists have come up with, and and the folks over here have just kind of do they have, like, this is where I disagree with Salvatore Babones too. I admire what Salvatore has done, but Salvatore made the statement that, well, Indian intellectuals are anti-India. What do you want the Americans to do? They just listen to what Indians say. Do Americans have no editorial control, whether it's the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, or any major Vox.com or whatever portals they have? Nikunj, are Americans so stupid? Am I supposed to live with the assumption that Americans are dumbasses? No, I'm going to say this because Salvatore says that.
So I consider it in two ways. One is, see, when it comes to understanding of India, right, or by extent Hinduism, so I'll just juxtapose the two together for this particular thing because of various dynamics
because
that we don't need to discuss right now.
It does matter. I am not denying the Indian fault in it, but I'm just saying that Americans are, humko kya pata.
So exactly. So now I'm going to give you two different aspects of this. First of all, is yes, there are a lot of ignorant people. So what they just want to hear is another brown person just telling them what it is. Okay, so they'll just gladly just listen to that. The second there's a sort of a anti-Hindu prejudice that also kind of circulates in this. So what they want to do is they want to use a bunch of useful idiots who would do their dirty job. So they want to show India/Hinduism in a negative light. See, this is how dirty these people are. So at the end of the day, when a typical American can go home to sleep, they're watching this like saying, hey, look, out there, it's pretty bad. You know, I'm glad that I'm sitting over here. Look at that Indians. Look at those people. They're dirty. They're this going on, all this stuff. So they use these two ideas. So there's an inherent anti-Hindu prejudice in certain circles, whether you call it media or, the popular nuance. Look at what's going on, the Oppenheimer, the controversy, as you may have already seen. And then you have these other set of people who don't know much, right? That's a majority of people who just don't know anything about Hinduism or India. I mean, if you look at the Pew surveys and stuff, right? Barely 1 in 4 Americans even knows a Hindu. Forget about knowing about Hinduism or things like that. So from the beginning, when they are a kid, right, till they grow up, they learn about India and Hinduism like the Temple of Doom, like that Suhagji was talking about. And by the way, I got bullied on that. I've talked about this before on your show that I used to be told by a girl in my homeroom every single day, do you eat monkey brains for breakfast? Every single day, okay? Every single day when I was in high school, right? So my point is, this is the understanding of a lot of Americans when they come to see India through this lens, okay? Now, all of these articles and stuff just kind of confirm that understanding or misunderstanding. So there are two aspects, like I said, just to kind of say anti-Hindu prejudice, which continues to be in certain circles, but a majority of people are just ignorant. They don't know much about Hinduism. They don't know much about India. So whatever they are fed, they're just going to take it. And that's the bigger concern, that when you start to think about laws, when you start to think about government intervention, right? These people are actually impacting lives. It's not just some, WhatsApp or Twitter or some social media chatter. It's really going and creating laws or using the full force of the government to go after a community just based on stereotypes that you have imbibed.
But Nikunj, again, it comes down to that question, and Suhag, I also want you to address this. That does not take the responsibility away. Look, societies are societies are built by some people who inform the masses. Like it or not, that's just how the cookie crumbles. So, what are the editor? So, see, is the editor of the New York Times a citizen of India?
No.
So what is the editor doing? वो उधर बैठ के झुनझुना बजा रहा है.
That's what I'm saying. So
doing?
just if you compare this to the coverage about sort of, if you think about like Muslims or the Middle East and things like that, there's a lot of
No,
nuance
let's
that's
talk
added to
about
that.
France. Let's talk about
Yeah,
France.
France,
There were
exactly.
riots in France. Look at the coverage in the New York
Yeah.
Times, in the Washington Post, in the Wall Street Journal, because there were two issues over here. One, they were their Anglo-Saxon, Anglo-American, larger Western brethren, France, because they were first world. Two, they were left wing. I am saying this as openly as possible. Macron. Now, if it was Marine Le Pen, it would have been a different story. They would have had to, beat her a little bit because she's Marine Le Pen. Not Wall Street Journal. Wall Street Journal would have been nice to Marine Le Pen. I just want to state that for the record. But
Times is different.
yeah, no, I mean, New York Times will obviously be like, they were so nuanced in their coverage of France. Now, so what do we do in something like this, Suhag, where editorializing matters and the editors are like, I don't know, this is like I send you an article and you don't editorialize it and you just cut, copy, paste and put it on your portal.
Look, I don't think it's every single newspaper article from the New York Times, Washington Post, they're not publishing truth, facts, or understanding. They're publishing a particular ideology. And so to me, you asked the question, are these problems coming from India? I would say 100%. 100%. They're coming from India because you have a class of elites that are discontented with the direction that India is going in. And the direction that India is going in is what the people on the ground want India to be, or the direction that they want the country to go in. So you have a class of people who had the privilege, the position and privilege of being able to shape the narrative about India. And it didn't matter what was happening on the ground. But now democracy is speaking very loud and clear. And you have a government that's responding to that. Whether you agree with every policy or not, whether it's the right way to solve a problem or not, that's not what we're talking about. But just this kind of meta idea that you have an elite that does not like what's happening, and they always had access to the West. And this has been the result of years and years of investment by the West. When you look at all the fellows that are coming to places like Harvard through the Ford Foundation and all of this, you have Western governments that have invested in the elite sectors in India, brought them over so that they get that kind of, the stamp of approval, the pedigree that's required, that, oh, I was a fellow at Harvard, or I was a fellow at Carnegie, or whatever it might be. And then these people become the talking heads for a country. Whether they're actually reflecting ground realities is not really a matter of concern. We know that that's not happening. If you want to learn, I actually said this yesterday because we were having a conversation just with HAF staff, is that if you took the New York Times article about the raid and you held it in your hand, literally, and then walked into the compound of Robbinsville, you would not find a reflection of what was printed on the ground. You wouldn't find chain linked fences. You wouldn't find dilapidated housing conditions. You would not find big, burly, gun-toting security officers. You would actually find like literally Indian uncles who have their tilak chanlo on and maybe have a flashlight, who will say Jai Swaminarayan before they let you into the gate.
And who have a very Gujarati English accent.
Exactly. Yes. Exactly. Like that's what and you're talking to two Gujaratis, by the way, so watch yourself. Yeah. But anyways, but what I'm saying is that there is, if you want to find the truth or some nuanced understanding of India or the Indian American community, don't go to the New York Times, because you have these old Indian elites that espouse either far left or Marxist views of the world. And so they're going to sloppily try to find their oppressor and their oppressed, and then cut and paste all the facts into a story or a plot that's already typeset. You have the big bad Hindus and specifically Savarna, Brahmins, whatever, find your punching bag of Hindus. And then you have the others, and then you fit in anything, vegetarianism, whatever it might be. And it just keeps becoming a vicious cycle. And then you have a mountain of citations that they have access to for circular citations. So it is absolutely coming from India, but it is a feedback loop in the sense that the United States has invested in that. How do you get these elites? Why do these elites all have, their stamp of approval from Oxford or Harvard or wherever else? Those are programs that have been put in place. So there we are.
Yeah. This is where Rajiv Malhotra's book is very useful, right? Snakes in the Ganga, where he says, yes, the information is supplied by the native informant, but the funding is done by the colonizer. Mm-hmm. And in this case, it is the Harvards, the Stanfords, the Oxfords of the world that are funding all these people who make all sorts of insane comments about India, which have no bearing. But again, I stick to this, Nikunj. What bothers me in this entire discourse is the complete burden is shifted on the Indian information generator, but not on the editor who is sitting on the information. So I'll give you an example. So I wrote an article in print during the second wave of COVID about the death numbers, right? Post the second wave. It's like this was after the Delta wave in India had done, and there was a lot of furor about the death numbers. So I did not know. I was just going for research and trying to understand what is happening. So I used to consistently follow a few hospitals and crematoriums. And it's very important I narrate the story because you'll understand what an editor is supposed to do. The editor of a print is not someone I may agree on many things ideologically with, Rama, but she's a good editor.
Yeah.
So the person I was working with, I would send them my write-up. They would say, back this up, back this up, back this up, back this up, back this up. And I would back these things up. And if they were blatantly false, I could not have been published in the print. Now, there are some portals in India, without taking names, where I know for a fact that you don't have to go through this process. There is no editorializing. Now, when I read an anti-Hindu, and I'm not saying anti-India, it's okay. They can be anti-India. I could care less. The Biden administration or any other administration in the United States of America, they need India right now. So it's not going to change anything from an Indian perspective. But if you are lying blatantly, if you're so wrong, then somewhere down the line, I question the motive of the person, the publishing house itself. You have to question the motive. The BAPS case, and I'm glad, somewhere in our podcast, Suhag mentioned the Cisco case, because what happened in the Cisco case was exactly same. They made these insinuations about the person who was accused of caste discrimination, and then later on we find out that person is as diversity, equity, inclusion on steroids. And it doesn't matter if they, because it is this incessant political war where Indian intellectuals who hate the current Indian dispensation, and it's not going anywhere before somebody thinks it's going to change. Get ready. 2024 is coming. More than likely, the same government is coming to power, as of in my opinion. And then you have an American enterprise that believes in funding useful idiots. I don't know what to say. It's part of the American foreign policy, where the American state will be giving a grand reception to Narendra Modi because, hey, we are going to invest billions of dollars in India. India is going to invest billions of dollars in America, and we're going to create jobs for each other. But what do we do about this? Because just like in Cisco, the entire case fell. We don't know what's going to happen in the BAPS case, but what do we do about this? Because what's happening to BAPS is a deep malaise inside the system itself.
No, it is. And remember, like, what I like to tell people is that, if you kind of rewind back, right, to the days of the book Mother India, all of these different, like, sort of colonial or post-colonial things that are going on. So, go back to 19th century, 20th century, right? And look at the depiction of Hindus, right? The atrocity literature, as Rajiv ji calls it also, that was generated at that time, right? It's not very different than what you see today on the ground, except the methods have changed. Now you have like online, you have some podcasts, you have a lot of things going on. But kind of the underlying atrocity literature about Hindus being these oppressors, the dirty people, don't know how to handle their toilets, don't know how to handle this, eating monkey brains, you name it, all kinds of stereotypes and tropes continue to be recycled. And of course, the latest one that continues to hit us again and again is the whole idea of caste, right? But caste has been going on for a long time also. Remember the word juggernaut. Many people may not even know about this, but the word juggernaut is actually was coined from Jagannath Puri, right? Where I'm forgetting the guy's name, but James Buchanan, I think his name is. He basically said that he's witnessing this crazy, horrible people who are crushing, the different types of Hindus are being crushed under this massive chariot, and this juggernaut is moving through forward. So that entire idea of something holy and sacred was turned into like this monster, and that's what you're seeing. Like, fast forward to whatever 200 years later, and you're still seeing this impact. And that is now, of course, like you said, funding the various snakes in the Ganga, as Rajiv ji describes it in his book, who are the elites, who are being funded, who are being patronized in these sort of Western institutions like Harvard, Georgetown. You pick different places, and then they kind of spit venom out again and again and again, and they get rewarded. So this is a citation, as Abhijit had mentioned on one of our programs, is a citation loop. You cite me, you do this, you do that, etc. And then they just create an entire ecosystem. And we are kind of stuck right in the middle of that, because the attacks are directed against us. Not just us as a Hindu community, but us as Hindu organizations. Because when Hindu organizations actually raise their voices, they are called Sanghis, they're called Brahminical, they're called right-wing, Hindutva, you name it. The menu of slur. Yeah, it's like, yeah, exactly. All of those, and more. So the menu of accusations and slurs that are targeting Hindu organizations is huge. It's really big. But when you compare that to other organizations or other communities, you can start to see some parallels, but it's very different. There's a lot of nuance. People are given the platform to talk about what their concerns are. But when it comes to Hindus, we are first guilty and then to be proven innocent. Just because I have a last name Trivedi, all of a sudden, me, my grandfather, my father, my grandfather, and generations of people are just essentially born and raised as caste supremacists, essentially, right? And then my daughter, who has not, born and raised in the U.S., is also apparently a caste supremacist just because she has a last name and because our diets are vegetarian. But if I was white, I would be like this hip and cool person who is now eco-friendly, sustainable, so on and so forth. But because I'm a Hindu, I'm a caste supremacist just because of my dietary habits, my last names. So all of this kind of narrative is being spun in an entire ecosystem that is being funded by various forces. And that's the effects of that we're seeing today.
So Suhag, I have a question for you.
If I can just add on, and then I'll answer your question. But honestly, I feel that we are, and this is something that someone, our communications director, has been saying more and more, is that we're in a post-truth era, meaning that truth doesn't really matter as much anymore. And that's a broader issue. I think that to Nikunj's point, there are other communities who feel that their stories aren't being told. They might have a little bit more context or nuance, so we're part of that broader problem. But it's compounded by almost 250 years of colonial narratives about us. So even digging through all of that, while everyone else might be, kind of at the tip of the iceberg, we're even further down trying to dig ourselves out in terms of trying to get our stories told. You mentioned Cisco and the editorial responsibility. And I think that we could tie this to the federal government in the way that they have, come down on BAPS, and 2.5 years later, we still don't see any charges. The civil case, the New York Times coverage of it, or even Cisco, when you have this much energy invested into a particular story and you put so many resources behind it, I think it makes it that much more difficult to step back and admit that you've been wrong. So the Cisco case is a good example. I did a deep dive into all of the public filings. I created a flow chart that would literally walk reporters through. Here's what happened this day. Here's the filing where we learned that, oh, Sundar Iyer was actually classmates with John Doe. Here's where we learned that John Doe got a several $1 million starting package. So John Doe, self-identified Dalit, is a millionaire. Oh, here's where we find out that the position that he's claiming that he was denied, he never applied for, or that the position was actually held by someone else who identified as a Dalit, right? All of these facts you can find in the court proceedings. If you are curious and enjoy going down rabbit holes, you can even go to other sources to find other pieces of information to connect the dots to what was publicly available. I made the link to this flow chart publicly available. We shared it with every reporter that reached out to us about the Cisco case, because we filed a case against the state in the way in which they've kind of violated our First Amendment rights. So we were in touch with a lot of reporters who were interested in the story. What they weren't interested in, and I would see, you know, when you put out a Google form, you can see little animals, which means that, you know, there's people in your document. Not a single story other than the one that I wrote for print. And I would agree with you that Rama is a really tough editor. No one told the story. All of these reporters are actually covering the Cisco case, but refused or, you know, played dumb when it came to, well, here are facts that the state has ignored. Here are facts that are publicly available that have been submitted to the court under oath. Why are you not covering the story? So there have been, I would say, at least 5 or 6 reporters that I've seen on Twitter where they will admit that their role is not so much about telling a story, but promoting an idea, which is actually activism. That's not being a journalist. That's being an activist. And I think we're just seeing far too much of that, which is what puts us in that post-truth era.
No,
Yeah.
so my question was, where does BAPS go from here from a legal perspective? Now, the case keeps going on, and you have this constant sword hanging over you. Look, the irony is that I am a disbeliever. None of you are actual from the sampradaya of BAPS, but at the end of the day, it is not about a sampradaya. It is about the entire modus operandi, right? So as far as this case is concerned, now what are going to be the next steps then, Suhag?
It's hard to know. You know, the federal government, until the federal government takes some sort of move forward or says, hey, I mean, there's going to be a statute of limitations, that's for sure. I think it's 5 years that, you know, once the raid occurs, that some sort of, you can't just have a sword or a noose dangling over your head for, you know, decades on end. That's not the way the system works. So I believe there's probably a 5-year statute of limitations. So we're at what, about 2.5 years?
2 years, yeah.
2 years. So that's still a ways to go. So they're probably, you know, complying with whatever inquiries that the federal government is making, whether it's Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, the U.S. Commission on Immigration Services. So, you know, that is up to BAPS. Until there's some sort of charges, I don't know where the civil case is going to go, because I believe it's on hold until something, you know, unravels one way or the other on the criminal charges. My fear is that given all the resources that the government put in, you know, into this unprecedented raid, the swagger and confidence with which it did it, because it clearly coordinated with the New York Times, or the activists, you know, I think there's probably a triangular coordination there with the lawyer, with the reporter, as well as the federal government. Are they going to try to make something stick? Is it going to be like throwing pasta at a wall to see like which thing sticks? Is it going to be human trafficking or some of the really serious charges? I hope not. I don't think it will be. It'll be something though, because after you've invested this much time, what is that? You know, you're trying to save your nose, right? Like, so, you know, will something happen? Who knows? But those are kind of maybe the potential motivations the government will have to save face. But as far as that affidavit, I would encourage reporters in India, since these workers are in India, find out the story. Let's hear from them. It's 12 workers who said we were coerced. There's a story to be told there. So if there are any remaining investigative journalists out there, I would encourage that talk to the lawyer, see what's going on. And, maybe some of those workers are still here too in the United States. Find them. What's really going on? I think there's an interesting story that needs to be uncovered. And at least the affidavit, in my view, is absolutely helpful for BAPS. And, they have claimed no wrongdoing, and the affidavit supports that. So time will tell.
So, but Nikunj, the BAPS still has to come out now. One of my problems with BAPS has been their communication. I don't know how they communicate sometimes. And look, the charges are serious. The caste discrimination is one thing. I think even there is a labor dispute, right? Where
Violation,
they have
right?
labor violation. Now, is there any communication from the BAPS that I have missed out, where they have given an explanation? Like, what has been the explanation from the BAPS side?
Yeah, so I mean, I obviously I don't want to comment on their behalf, but I would say that they are being very cautious because they have even, and I'll go back to the Akshardham temple attack several years ago, right? What instead of coming out strong and sort of issuing massive statements, they sort of played in the background. They played, they did not respond as strongly as somebody may say, hey, your temple was attacked, why didn't you respond, right? That has been their history, both in the Delhi / even in Gujarat, there was an attack. So that's been kind of how they have been operating, just from a historical perspective. That doesn't mean they'll operate the same way as far as this lawsuit is concerned. So they're being very cautious. That's just the way from a organizational approach that I have seen over the years, that they don't really comment too much in public as to what's going on, but let the truth come out. I'm sure they're working in the background. They have lawyers obviously working on the case. So they'll probably make comments when they're ready to make comments as far as like the case is concerned, a new development in the case. But so I'll be obviously I can't comment on that, but that's been what my observation has been historically speaking. Even when temples were attacked, with terrorists coming in, they did not have such a strong response. Instead, they kind of took a much more sort of like, I would say, calmer response, if at all, per se. So
yeah, and just to address the bit about Suhag, what you said, right? In India, it's not an issue because BAPS is just another sect in India. They don't feel threatened in India. They are very secure in India. They are very safe in India. They are free to practice their religious norms in India. And it's not like I agree with everything BAPS says or believes in at a spiritual or as a social level. I don't actually. But what is being done over here now? These charges are serious. Now, either they prove the charges, and then I will be the first person on my podcast going hammer and tongs after the BAPS day in and day out. Or if things like this come out where we hear news of the workers being coerced to say these things just so that the activists who want to attack Hindus in the United States of America, uh, they want to use this as a cudgel to beat them. Now, these are seriously disturbing things, Suhag. And so the natural question should be, how should the community in North America respond to this?
We have to just be vigilant. We have to wake up and recognize that there are serious challenges to our community. And unfortunately, it's coming from the inside. But if you have a infection, you have to either you can deal with the infection, or it's not an either or. It's and you deal with the infection, but you also strengthen yourself. And I think that we need to do more of that. Being more aware of our rights, being more aware of not just what's happening to the community, but digging a little bit deeper. We're no longer in an age where you can read one article and think you have an understanding of what has happened. And I've talked to a lot of people who just, whether it's Cisco or whether it's BAPS, like, oh yeah, caste discrimination happened there. I'm like, oh really? Where's the court case? Where are the finding of facts? Like, so we have to be a lot more diligent on how we get our information. Talk to your friends on the ground, go visit, read multiple news sources, right? Support organizations that are doing the kind of work to educate our community about it. So we have to definitely kind of shake off the apathy that I think is kind of inbuilt to our community. As far as BAPS, though, look, if this was going to happen, and I might get criticized for this, but if this was going to happen to any organization, I'm relieved that it was BAPS, because BAPS has the strength financially, socially, in every which way to adequately fight this sort of thing. Had it been some small temple, you're talking, I can only imagine what the legal bills are right now. Any other temple, had it been attacked in this way, or charged in the way that BAPS was, it would have folded. So in that sense, I hope that they continue to fight very vehemently against false charges, because this is going to become the model for every other Hindu institution, whether it's a temple, whether it's an organization, whatever. But the community just needs to wake up and recognize that these things are also related. Why is it that you have kind of the same so-called reports or surveys from organizations like Equality Labs popping up in news stories where that's cited, popping up as submitted evidence in the Cisco case, popping up as evidence submitted to the over dozen of college campuses that have now passed caste policies? And this idea that, well, it doesn't matter if I'm not discriminating is just baloney. It doesn't matter, because you're stigmatized and you may be susceptible to false accusations, or even if you don't get to that far step, certainly you're going to be stigmatized. Where if a company or a college or anything has a choice between picking between someone who's of Indian origin and someone else, all of a sudden the Indian origin people have been painted story after story after story of either being inherently bigoted or oppressive, either not being law abiding or whatever it might be. It's not going to be a cultural fit. And so for that reason, we need to really be vigilant about the stories that are being told about us. I'll just add one more thing, that, we as a community, and a lot of our community elders always talk about, oh, we're a successful community. How do you measure success? Fine. If it's just economic and educational, woohoo. But if we're talking about political, or in terms of our imprint on the narratives and the policies that are being made that impact us, I would say we're pretty close to zero. So we can't just look myopically on how we measure success. We need to encourage our next generation to go into the media, to go into academia, to go into policy, so that we are investing. We have to invest in also educating them about who we are as a people, what challenges we face as a community, and to make them strong so that they will not capitulate to the broader pressures that have already infiltrated some of these spaces, and then become champions for our community from the side that's actually shaping those narratives and policies.
I don't know. I maybe Nikunj can share his views too on this, but my biggest grouse with the Hindu community is that the Hindu community has no nuisance value. Listen, looks like let's take the Cisco caste case, right? It fell. Nobody can accuse me of being. I want the annihilation of Jati Varna. I say it again and again and again on my podcast without flinching an eyelid. But if a person was falsely accused of being a casteist, the only way they can deal with this problem is you have to sue the pants of people who maligned you.
Mhm.
And until and unless you don't have a nuisance value as an individual or as a community, I am sorry to say this has been my biggest grouse with the Hindu community. In India, lawsuits take forever. In America and Canada and United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, lawsuits come to a conclusion. What do you think? I can't take the name of the person, but the Muslim community in England, they say they are lawyered up to the hilt. I'm saying this from white people telling me, not Indian Hindus. White people have told me off the record that if we say a word, these folks are lawyered up to the hilt. They will take us to court, and the cost of fighting the lawsuit is way more. So we just don't say anything. The same thing happened. I don't know how many people have followed the case of Kim Bolan and the Vancouver Sun. This is in Canada, where one teeny little mistake was made by Kim Bolan in the reportage, and the lawsuit was filed by the Khalistanis. And look at the results after that in the Vancouver Sun. Barely any reportage happens, and these things matter. So Nikunj, why would anybody take the Hindu seriously? The Hindu doesn't do that.
No, I fully agree. I mean, we have very little nuisance value because we need to. We are like, first of all, immigrants. Like, that, just keep your head down, do what you need to do. But I think we need to get out of that, and that's something that we have been, talking to a lot of our community members on, saying, look, if you want to create, there's got to be deterrence, right? As you mentioned, see, if there is no deterrence, people are going to keep attacking you again and again and again. But you got to go after at least one of them and sue the pants out of them, drag them through as many administrative, legal, whatever burden, make their life political hell, whatever different things that we want to do. Make an example out of one or two different types of institutions, individuals, whatever it is, that have dared to go and have these false charges and make life hell for the Hindu community. I mean, think about it. If you think about the time that I spend, the time that Suhagji spends, the time that all different Hindu organizations time spent on fighting and on these, just this caste issue, for example, since 2020, it's been incredible amount of frustration, incredible amount of like sleepless nights, incredible amount of convincing that needs to be done to our own people first, before we have to even convince outsiders. So we lack that nuisance value. We lack that grit that you need to go after this. Because when you say Satyamev Jayate, you're talking about Bhagavad Gita, all these grand things, but you're never going after the people who have come after you in an adharmic, unethical way to take essentially you out as a community. And if we don't do that, until we do that, we're not going to be successful. It comes to political power. It comes to legal challenges. It comes through grassroots activism. So many different things that need to be. And you need to start making examples. Let's start in California. That's where the issue is hot right now. Let's go after Seattle. Nothing is stopping us from doing that. Why aren't we doing that as a community, not just as individuals who are doing their own little bit? I'm talking about some serious power. And as you mentioned, you got to lawyer up. You got to have that legal battle ready to go. You got to have the political will. All those things are needed. Until then, we're just going to be, getting tired and getting frustrated again and again and again, because this is going to keep happening.
I'll just say on the lawyering up, as a lawyer, I agree. And, we do have, at least, I think the community, I take a little bit more of a look, not everyone can be a fighter, but you can support fighters. Yeah, and so that's what we need to do. We already have 3 pending cases related to caste in California. We have the one where the 2 faculty members have sued the Cal State University system for having added caste to their non-discrimination policies. We have a Section 1983, which is a civil rights claim against the California Civil Rights Department, very ironically named, in my view, for an institution or an entity that's supposed to uphold civil rights, but is trampling on the civil rights of Hindu Americans and Indian Americans, and the way that it just perpetuated so many racist stereotypes about Hindus and Indians in its Cisco filing, and also tried to define Hinduism as having inherent to it a religious and social hierarchy in which untouchability and oppression are required through social custom and legal mandate. The US Constitution tells us that a state power or state entity cannot define religion. It cannot treat one religion differently than others. And that's exactly what the Civil Rights Department has done. So there are at least, and then we also have a motion to intervene in the state case, in the state court case of Cisco. So I think legal action is occurring. These issues are, at least specifically on caste. Now it's another point altogether on defamation. We filed it. Unfortunately, standing was not there for us, but I would encourage other groups. If people are saying inaccurate things about your organization, file suit. Just know that it's going to cost a lot of money. And that's where the community, where if they don't have the stomach for, getting onto the battlefield, at least support it. And so if you've been defamed as an organization, file suit. And at some point it's going to stick, because a lot of the lawsuits that we know are filed in terms of a nuisance value, they may not necessarily go somewhere. I'm not encouraging frivolous lawsuits, but with caste specifically, though, these are questions of first impression. They are complicated, and we have to also be cognizant of the fact that very often the judge or the lawyers that we're trying to hire are also steeped into some of these stereotypes of Indian society being a pyramid with 4 classes, and you have the horrible, evil, wily priests at the top lording over the rest of society. Like, those are the types of stereotypes that we're also dealing with. And so it's important that we file those suits, but I think that we have to see how 1 or 2 maybe go before we unleash, I think, the power of the law against these issues.
All right. And now I'm going to take questions from the viewers. Very good question. As a community, and both of you should answer this. So, Nikunj, as a community, and then Suhag, what kind of consequences are we going to ensure for the people who have degraded the view of use in the public sphere? We just, I don't know about the consequences for the people, but what kind of consequences are we looking at for the community? We should discuss that.
The consequences for our community. What are the consequences?
Yes.
I mean, there's some major consequences. Look, we're going to be canceled across the board. I mean, we're seeing this on college campuses. When UC Davis, for example, there's a group in UC Davis that basically openly called out saying in November, you should not celebrate Diwali, because celebrating Diwali is akin to worshiping caste gods and goddesses, which are naturally violent to Muslims, Dalits, Bahujans, Sikhs, Adivasis, etc. Like, this is the type of stuff that you're going to be seeing on college campus. It's already happening. In workplace, I know people who have basically been called out as oh yeah, you Indians, you people are always like trying to oppress like all these lower caste people and things like that. It might sound very benign, but this can actually be a part of your employment promotions and stuff like that. Do I want to deal with this caste nonsense? I've been forced to take this training. Now all of a sudden I got an Indian guy, and I'm dealing with this. Some white guy is talking about some Indian guy who's being not very is discriminating against another Indian guy based on the stereotypes. So there's this idea of cancel culture even in your workplace. And then we talked about some of these small businesses and temples. If you are accused, right, what ends up happening is, if you don't even have to go to court, nothing will happen. Negative publicity will start taking out your business, and a reputational damage to your temple in the community that you're part of. So all of a sudden there's a daily, like a headline in a state newspaper. Forget about New York Times. A state newspaper that XYZ temple is accused of deploying slavery. Just saying, right? And they will say slavery equals caste discrimination. So now all of a sudden you have an entire community around you saying, hey, you guys are a bunch of people who would condone slavery and things like that. So there's an entire sort of things at risk. Your financial resources are at risk, your reputation is at risk, and your future generation is at risk. Because why would somebody want to be a Hindu with a certain last name or a certain type of habit if you're going to be continuously accused of it? And I know kids who have been bullied on Instagram just for what their last name is, based on the Cisco case, based on the Khalistan issue in Canada, so many different things that go on. So this is these are the consequences. I can go on and on, but these are the consequences that we are going to be getting, and we're already seeing some of that play out today, actually.
Suhag.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that Nikunj has mentioned. I'd also say that there's a consequence just at the family level. These types of issues, for especially with young people, the influences on college campuses towards social justice, in which, in that kind of framework of social justice, of needing to have an oppressor and an oppressed, you have Hindu students who are susceptible to internalizing an idea that they are perpetually historically oppressors. They come home, they're turning, it's natural to rebel against your parents,
Do
but
we have a oppressor hat?
we should, maybe, I suppose,
I am
distribute
oppressor.
them. But it's definitely having an impact. I don't know how many parents that have reached out, and I know Nikunj, you guys have as well. Parents who are saying, my child has come home and he's using all this language that I don't know how to deal with. And they're saying everything that we do, everything we've stood for, everything that we have sacrificed so much to hold on to, whether it's reading the Gita as a family, being vegetarian, if they are, all of those things, they're now questioning. I think I saw a post about Bharatnatyam being some sort of Brahminical, patriarchal something or other,
Yoga.
right? Like, so all of these types of things are having a real impact just at the family level, which then feeds into, are we going to have a next generation of Hindus? If people want to ask, why is that important? I think it's important because I think Hindu Dharma is a force for good. We have so much in our tradition and in our philosophy that can, really help solve some of the major issues that we face as humanity, whether it's living in consonance with the earth, being a little bit lighter in our use of, material stuff. All of these things are valuable. We can't even offer the best of us because we're just too busy fighting against, these false stereotypes about us. Employment, we on a weekly basis are hearing from, especially workers in tech. Someone asked me what caste I was. I don't know how to answer that question because it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. If you're a second generation, third generation, even folks in India growing up in urban areas, they may not know. Why should that question even be asked? Imagine if that question was asked to any other ethnicity. Oh, you're a little tan. Do you have African American blood? Like that sort of question, because you know what it's going towards, would be absolutely unacceptable in the workplace. But now it's like lunch talk, like, water cooler chat. So those types of things we're seeing. There were even some Fortune 500 companies where employees came to us saying they started an entire Slack channel that's just called Caste. And people, they're activist types there, Ambedkarites or Dalit activists that would be on the side of supporting a bill like SB 403. And not all Dalits and Bojans support SB 403, but those who support it, who are then posting all sorts of just horrible stereotypes about Hindus, talking about how Hinduism is the equivalent of slavery and blah, blah, blah. And you have now non-Asian white HR administrators who are completely ill-equipped to deal with this. They unleash something thinking that they're being so politically correct to help have people have conversations about this. No, you're not having conversations. You're unleashing divisiveness and hate in your corporation and affecting the ability for your workers to do what they're hired to do, which is to make a good product or whatever it might be. So there's definite consequences to all of this, regardless of whether SB 403 becomes a law, regardless of what happens with BAPS. The media coverage in and of itself has done so much damage.
I think the Hindu community is too defensive. Like if somebody came up to me and asked me my caste, 9 out of 99% probability it's a white person, white, ultra progressive. Probabilities of that person being a woman are even higher. I'm sorry. I am stating the most obvious reality. And if people don't like it, well, too bad. This is what's going to happen. It's going to be a white woman, most likely. Well, I think I would ask her, so which slaves did you own? Well, I would ask that question. I don't care. And I know the white person will like, wait, I don't know, no slaves. Then why the hell am I supposed to know my caste? If
Yeah.
you don't know if you own slaves or not. See, the problem with the Indian community or the Hindu community is they are too apologetic. They are too defensive. I'm not. If somebody asked me this question, this would be my answer. I would go on the offense, and next time I will tell them that, and then I'll use their words that you're triggering me, you're othering me, this is a microaggression against me, blah 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 blah, whatever language these people use, the weirdos of this world. And then I would eventually, if nothing works, I would be like, I'm going to my HR department and
Yeah.
accusing you of bullying me. The problem is, it all boils down, Nikunj, as I said, there is no nuisance value. Arey salo fattu logo, tum nuisance value create karo. And believe me, violence is not needed. Bill Maher and his joke was right. Civilized people sue each other. They don't beat each other up. Even the threat of a lawsuit is enough. Now, the next question was, I think I should answer this. Is the Indian government taking cognition of these people who are masqueraded as intellectuals for saying outright lies? The short answer is yes. And I will not say how I know this or why I know this and to what extent I know this, because some things are not supposed to be said. But I can tell you the Indian government is very much aware of what's happening. The Indian government is also concerned about the diaspora. I am assuring you they are. Maybe the method of solving the problem for the Indian government may not be something that is quote unquote ideal, according to many people. But I can assure everyone the Indian government is very much aware of what's happening, the attacks that are happening. But the next question is very important. And I saw a very interesting video of a MAGA pastor calling Vivek Ramaswamy the devil worshipper. Oh, so, and by the way, I did not find it cringe. I was just laughing. I was laughing at the stupidity of that person. I know what else am I supposed to do? I mean, my brain, I was like, what a moron. But so this question is good. With upcoming and I want both of you again to answer this. So Nikunj, first to you. With upcoming elections in the United States of America, is there a tracker on which representatives, senators have been supportive or antagonistic to the American Indian community or Hindu community? I'll narrow it down even more. Hindu community.
Is there a tracker? Who's keeping the tracker? I will just say that, there's no tracker per se, official tracker out there, but I know various groups are keeping a tab on which representatives and which people are not. So, I've been anti-Hindu, whether it's like openly or covertly, etc., supporting various, whether it's SB 403 type of policies in California or not. And the community is taking note, right? I mean, it's still got a long way to go, but I know for a fact, I get emails and calls from different people saying, hey, this person has been like this, can we go and how can we like defeat them in the next election? What can we do from a political perspective? And I say, look, obviously as COHNA, as a 501c3 organization, we cannot endorse candidates or not support them, etc. That kind of a political, sort of stances. But if you feel strongly, go at it, right? The power is yours. You got to make sure that you go and create that awareness about this particular representative or particular state senator or assembly member, whoever it is, and get active, right? There are ways to, and we can help you from an education perspective. We can provide you some resources as far as education is concerned. And we do call out on Twitter and many places. We call out representatives or lawmakers who are openly anti-Hindu or who are supporting anti-Hindu policies. So all it takes is for people to go and read up on that. So long way to say there is no tracker per se, but we are keeping tabs on different types of elected officials or state representatives or whoever else who are anti-Hindu and and to remind our community that these are the folks that are unfortunately against our community.
Suhag?
Yeah, same. And we know that there are congressmen at the federal level and at the state level that have been tremendously helpful to our community. And look, the system here works because you have to grease the wheels. And I think that while many people in our community have been greasing the wheels, they've been doing it just for a photo op. I think there's a growing awareness, and we're also a 501c3, so not in the position legally to be able to endorse candidates or to give donations and that sort of thing. So for all those people on Twitter who always say HAF supports so-and-so, you're off because we can't. But for those organizations that can, those are political action committees or even individuals who are getting more organized. They are now making demands because that's the way the system works. I think to the broader point about, Hindus, we tend to be kind of passive, or we don't want to ask. I mean, in some sense, it's cultural because our tradition tells us to do things without expectation. But when you live in a system that requires that, you have to play the game. And so, like I said, there are people who are now donating to those candidates that have been friendly. They are also donating to the opposition of those who are running against those who have not been friendly. So I'm sure we'll be seeing some sort of action in California against someone like Senator Wahab, where the community, there's definitely been, in some sense, that's the silver lining with SB 403, is that it has woken up the community in a way that nothing else has to date. And so I'm hoping that we'll see some folks that are choosing to run. Now, you don't have to run immediately for state assembly or state senate. You can start small, start at the city council, school board. Even libraries have boards of trustees where you can run for election or get involved. So there's many different ways in which that we as a community can begin building our kind of political footprint, because the place that we are ahead of the game is that financially we have the grease. We just haven't used it the way it needs to be used. Yeah. So I see this all as an opportunity. But one thing I will say is that, when you look at the Equality Act and things like that happened in the UK, there was a concerted effort for the entire community kind of to move from Labour to the Conservative Party. I don't know that that's really feasible here in the United States. We represent 1.5% or less than 1.5% of the entire US population in a much bigger country. And politics are very different locally. So if you make that concerted effort to say, okay, well, this party's not friendly to us and this one is, well, guess what? That MAGA pastor represents the far right wing. So, we have to be also smart about where we put our support and what party we align ourselves with in order to actually win elections. If you're going to be a Republican in a historically blue district, you might as well not, just throw your money in the toilet. That's what you're essentially doing. So we have to also be discerning in knowing what our local history, political history is, to then really kind of have an impact.
Yeah,
and I would just add one more thing.
Go ahead.
Allyship is very important. See, what ends up happening is that we collectively, as Suhag said, we're a very small portion of the American population in general, right? But where we can be powerful is having allyships with communities who face similar issues, who may have different issues, but are also concerned about what we are facing, right? So creating that bridge and expanding your circle of influence is also very important. And our community historically has not been very good at it. We've been very inward looking, it's all Indian, all Hindu all the time. And we're not looking outward saying, hey, you know what? Who else has this issue? Like, I'll give you you could have it doesn't have to be a Hindu issue. It could be, I don't know, women's rights, like something else. So if you can find a women's rights group, let's say, for example, and you can say, okay, I resonate with them. I'm going to go and support that women's rights group for what they're fighting for, right? Now you're building that allyship so that next time when you have an issue, you can lean on them and say, hey, we worked with you on this and we need your support on this. And that allyship is how other organizations and other groups win against us. If you look at Equality Labs and if you look at some of these Ambedkarite groups, they have allyships with all these like random groups out there, or at least they seem random to us. But they've been working on this for decades, essentially. And now the support is so strong, all they have to do is just send one email or one phone call, and boom comes like an entire letter of endorsement from all these different labor groups and black groups and civil rights groups and this group and that group, etc., because they have created an entire narrative and worked on that allyship.
So the only solution to that is suing the pants out of these people who falsely accuse the Hindu community and the Indian community. That's it. It all comes down to that eventually. So I'll give you a nice example. In the United Kingdom, gender surgeries were allowed under the National Health Program, NHS, all as the British like to call it, and HS. So when a bunch of kids who were allowed to do those surgeries or encouraged by their doctors to do those surgeries found out, boy, I did not like that. They sued the pants out of the healthcare system. And guess what the healthcare system did? You have to be 18 now. You cannot do it before that. So it's just that in the case of the Hindu community, they just need to find the right case. And I think Cisco was the best case because it went into the favor of the person who was accused. That person now should not sue the John Doe. That person should sue Equality Labs. That person should sue every other organization that was an advocate for the Hindu community. Times that person should sue Washington Post, and and the Indian community should do a Gawker. What the Indian community should do, and I'm not personally happy about what Peter Thiel did to Gawker, but Peter Thiel showed the way. All he did was he told Hulk Hogan, "Here, Hulkamania, take money, sue the pants out of Gawker." Gawker ran out of business. The Indian community has the financial wherewithal to do it. And why am I? Somebody might say, "Kushal, you have given the strategy out." No, no. I am stating this on the record. If you lie about the community, you deserve to be sued. If you are maligning a community where children are going to suffer and the lives of children being born and raised in the United States of America is going to be affected, you need to be sued, my friend. And this is coming from a person who hates Jati Varna. I hate it. But I still believe that Indian kids born and raised over here have nothing to do with it. They don't owe anybody in India the answer for anything. But at the same time, I'll repeat this again. Look, there is a global Islamic thing where everybody kinds of pulls their resources and bullies. India, unfortunately, was not economically powerful. It's very interesting. I saw a video recently, I think it was today or day before yesterday or something, or yesterday, where the Prime Minister said, we have to appreciate the confidence of the Prime Minister. He said, in my third term, as if, he's like, in his mind, there is a third term. So Modi's like, what are you guys talking about? So he's like, in my third term, I will make sure we are one of the top 3 economies in the world. He did not say number 3. He said we could be number 2 too. So, I mean, props to the Prime Minister's confidence. But the point is, I think as far as India and the Indian government is concerned, a lot of these things come with financial might. So at times, I think Indian citizens living in Indian origin people living in the United States or in the Western world in general, they feel angry, rightfully so, with the Indian government, because they look at and they see, why aren't you responding? Look, a lot of things I know come from financial might. When India becomes that financial powerhouse, look, I always tell people, look at the board of cricket control of India. I want India to be not exactly like BCCI, but kind of what BCCI does to the cricketing world, where basically everybody dances around BCCI. I don't know how else to say. And before the BCCI, it was the BCCI, it was the ECB and the ACB, the English Cricket Board and the Australian Cricket Board. The only reason the Englishmen and the Aussies are whining right now is because they don't have the control. The Indians have the control. And these things are natural. Nature abhors vacuum. Today, the Americans control everything. Tomorrow somebody else will, but we will end this discussion at that. But can I also add this? I am glad Suhag and Nikunj have come together on this podcast, and I'll share why. One of the biggest problems of the Hindu community is the lack of unison or lack of unity in communication. मर के हमारे पास बहुत कम एक्टिविस्ट ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस और एक्टिविस्ट ग्रुप्स हैं जो हिंदू एक्टिविज्म करते हैं, मर के। मैं जानबूझ के हिंदी में कह रहा हूं, आई विल रिपीट इट इन इंग्लिश टू. So we already have a paucity when it comes to organizations who work for the community causes. I am really happy that both Suhag and Nikunj agreed to come together, because for them the cause was bigger. The community is bigger than all of them as individuals and their organizations. So I would urge all of you from this platform. Look, I am a adha idhar, adha udhar kind of, or 35% here, 65% in India kind of a life living person. So I am constantly in touch with the diaspora and folks in India too. So I have this unique perspective where I literally hear both sides, not just digitally, but physically, because I live in both the worlds. The community needs these kinds of responses where, look, three people today are talking. One, I am a Cārvāka. Suhag is not from a BAPS sampradaya, and nor is Nikunj from a BAPS sampradaya. Our darshan and sampradaya is different. But for us, when something unjust is done, all organizations should come together, whether it's Coalition of Hindus of North America or whether it's the Hindu American Foundation. And I applaud both of you for agreeing to come together and do this, and raise your voice. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Of course, no, this is wonderful. Absolutely.
So, guys, we'll wrap today's podcast up. In the description of the podcast, you will find the Twitter handles of both the Hindu American Foundation and COHNA. Go follow them on social media. If you want to support them, all the bios include the details of the website, so you can go support them financially too, and you can go and subscribe to their programs. There are different programs of the Hindu American and the Coalition of Hindus of North America. And if you are someone in North America who is a Hindu or an Indian origin person in general, gain some political consciousness, because without that, this problem is not going to solve. And when I say political consciousness, I don't mean the left or right. I just mean political consciousness. It doesn't matter which part of the political spectrum you are, but be politically active, be sensible, and learn more about issues that matter to you. The spirituality will sort itself out. I don't think the Hindu community has a spiritual crisis. I think the Hindu community has a political crisis. So I'll end it at there. But as always, thank you very much for subscribing. If you have not subscribed, do go subscribe, like the video, leave a comment in the comment section. And this podcast is purely driven by members. So if you can, please become a member of the Cārvāka podcast on YouTube, Patreon, or Fanmo. You can buy the merchandise on kushalmehra.com or send your donations to UPI. I will see you guys next time. Take care. Bye.